Africa is the poorest and least developed continent, which comes from a variety of issues spanning from ancient BC to the age of social media. Issues that are difficult to solve simply because of the lack of resources, disruption from foreign nations, or the resilience of greed. Will they be forever attached to the continent? Anyways, here are the problems of Africa. Like, subscribe and share it please to help us. Thanks and enjoy. Brain drain is a problem that drains Africa of its main resources and bolsters the economies of other countries. Many of the middle-class citizens of African countries tend to send their children abroad to get a foreign education and in many cases gain a form of residency in the foreign country, which tends to have more opportunities. With the lucrative system of taxes and immigration, foreign nations eventually benefit immensely from these people wanting to immigrate to their system. Sure, they send money home to their family members, but again, the banks and other middlemen end up getting a cut of their pie. Many of these immigrants would love to return to Africa and start businesses or work in their countries. However, they have to contend with a bigger power, the government, an outdated problem Africa has to deal with. Government corruption has been draining the prosperity of their countries since the decolonization of the continent. This is apparent with the amount of money governments acquire from trade and agreements with other countries and companies, and only letting a tiny piece of the pie trickle down to the remainder of the population. Take a look at the oil situation in Nigeria. As people keep dying in the Niger Delta from pollution and not getting their cut to improve their environment, Shell is profiting billions from keeping a stronghold on the location. In Equatorial Guinea, the president who has been in power through 5 US presidential terms has not really improved the nation that is supposed to be one of the wealthiest in Africa. Angola cannot account for the over $5 billion it has acquired, as it's an oil and diamond exporter. The government generally looks for ways to drain its citizens as well, and they tend to add unnecessary hurdles for the average person to start a business. Cabinets are filled with members who inherit the positions instead of merit. It is also commonplace for presidents to tamper with the constitution of their countries to stay in power longer, and that's why the continent has the most longest serving presidents. Eventually, these leaders become aloof of the problems of their country, while their family members spend the money of their country as their luxury allowances. This is inevitably why coups happen, a persistent problem on the African continent. Let's just look at some quick facts of the coups on the African continent, shall we? In the 1960s and 70s, there was an attempted coup every 55 days. By 2012, there were over 200 coups and attempted coups, and since 2010, there have been about 40 plus coups attempts. West Africa has experienced over 44% of the coup attempts on the continent. Sudan has the most coups, but Burkina Faso has had the most successful coups, and Africa has the leading number of coups on the planet, with Latin America a distant second. The simple reason for these coups can come from the dissatisfaction with the current government, greed, or a tribal takeover. Sure, in many cases one can blame the Western world for influencing and funding these coups, but national pride and positive outlook for posterity should generally outweigh greed. Of all problems, this is the most dangerous because of the lives it affects and the poverty it can inflict on the continent. Poverty has been an overarching problem that is interconnected with other problems in Africa. Granted, Africa has been a victim of the greed of man manifested in the events of the transatlantic slave trade and colonization. The continent is still behind in prosperity compared to other places on Earth. There are many educated and brilliant individuals who are jobless because the children of wealthy inherit jobs. The lack of industrialization creates a void for jobs in waiting, and the rapid population growth creates a strain for mouths to feed when the country's government cannot sustain a decent infrastructure. Even if we looked at all the billionaires on the continent, you'd be hard-pressed to find a rags to riches story, as wealth is needed to build wealth in Africa. Poverty leads to security issues, people accepting bribes, and uncontested loyalty to the wrong leaders due to financial interest. When extreme poverty is something one battles on a daily basis, there is no space for creativity or clarity of mind to blossom, and many individuals become over-reliant on money because it's all they have to hinge on to climb up the economic structure. Speaking of over-reliance, Africa has received over 1.2 trillion in aid and counting, though unevenly distributed throughout the continent. Many African countries have also collaborated with China to improve their infrastructure, a move that has created concern from America over the years. Though this has increased the life expectancy of many countries and added jobs to the ecosystem, Africa has not harnessed this opportunity to become partners. Africa has the leverage to ask for better opportunities. However, the people in power usually depend on the basic form of operation, get money for resources, and divide it amongst themselves. Instead of looking internally, African leaders tend to look outside for solutions, like modeling their economic goals after European countries or creating contracts with foreign companies. Countries also are over-reliant on natural resources that they most likely do not have plans on diversification once the natural resources are depleted. It is only recently that African countries are moving to diversify their attempt to economic growth. But again, this is sometimes hampered by tribalism. Tribalism has levels of problems on the continent. It is an umbrella to the other interpersonal problems on the continent. In the South, even though apartheid was abolished, racial tension between the black and white people of South Africa still exists, with the Indians also thrown in the mix. Then out of that tension, xenophobia will usually rear its ugly head every few years as South Africans get frustrated with other Africans setting up businesses in their country. Then you have the Sahel, which is a geographical divide between North and Sub-Saharan Africa. Since North Africa is closer to Europe and the Middle East, it is more Arabic and it has its own complicated history. As a result, Sub-Saharan Africans sometimes consider North Africans as Arabs that want to distance themselves from the rest of Africa. Morocco trying to join the European Union in 1987 is something many Africans will point to as well. Even though the Sahel divide might just be rumblings, there are tribal issues within countries that prevent the progress of these nations. Examples can be seen in the war for Darfur, the never-ending issues of the triad in Nigeria with the Igbo, Hausa and Yoruba, or the Rwandan genocide as a result of the Hutu and Tutsi problems. This is an emotional problem that affects everyone in the economic and religious spectrum. However, there is a problem which has dated back to the first interaction between Africans and people from other continents. All this ties back to one of the biggest problems the continent has been battling with, and that is image. We either do nothing or the wrong thing, which is a comment from the current Rwandan president. This image has also been perpetrated by the media when these problems happen on other continents as well. There are many places in America much worse than most of the poor places in Africa. CNN would always mention how presidents have stayed long in power, while Russian President Putin has been president since 1999. Many people still consider Africa a country, while others continue to have an image of a skinny child in a dry climate area looking for food. However, as globalization works hand in hand with social media, there is a slow change to the image of Africa, and this all leads to the hope of Africa. In addition to having all the natural wealth on earth, many of the countries remain stable, with economies rising and its diaspora growing in wealth and strength overseas. More Africans are returning to the motherland to grow businesses despite the hurdles, and the Africa Free Trade Agreement is beginning to bloom. The continent is having a growth with its middle class, which is the lifeblood of any economy, and thanks to social media, many YouTubers are documenting their adventurous travels all over the continent. Mega cities are on the rise, and an African global city will be coming soon. Extreme poverty will be drastically reduced in the next 30 years. Afrobeat is creeping into the global billboards. African countries are sending spaceships into space, and smart cities will be commonplace. This is a great time for Africa. Hopefully we will be the generation to experience all it has to offer. What other problems were missed in the making of this video? Don't be shy to comment below. Thanks for watching. Will we see you in the next one?